Intelligent Talk 24/7 on 1030 KVOI, The Voice.
634 in Tucson, Arizona. You can stream us live at kvoi.com/listen live. We're with Kris Kobach calling in from the Kansas-Missouri region of the universe.
If Rhode Island is listening online and called in about this issue in the past.
That's true.
Great time to talk to the guy that put it together.
790-2040 is the phone number. I know the phones are ringing for Mr. Kobach. Kris, welcome back, sir.
My pleasure.
Hey, I was checking out the local news story about how you're catching grief from 4 people who don't, because you're a University of Missouri KC professor, about your work on this stuff with Arizona. How's that going?
It's going fine. Yeah, you had some community groups, I think they called themselves, in Kansas City, who were appalled that I would be a law professor who seeks to enforce the law and seeks to help Arizona with its bills. I guess in their view of the universe, professors have to be liberal and have to be opposed to the enforcement of the law.
Well, you would think that the powers that be would want not to suppress you, because then all those other liberal professors out there who do all their stuff would set a bad precedent, I think, personally.
Yeah, it was just insane. But thankfully the university administration stood by my academic freedom and my right to say what I believe, and I believe Arizona is doing the right thing.
Hey, our beautiful city here, Tucson, Arizona. I mean, we are right here in the ground. We are on the ground zero of this issue.
We like to call it a liberal petri dish, just to set up Tucson for you a little bit.
So they decided they're gonna sue the state of Arizona about 1070. Okay, in relation, all of a sudden they're constitutional experts. We did have one of the city council women here, Shirley, her concern was about the cost that's going to, they keep going now all of a sudden where everyone's fiscally conservative, and we're worried about the cost on local police. To me, it's all part of their, it's part of that stop that they would do anyway. So
yeah, exactly.
And they're talking about, of course, that they got to transport the prisoner and all this stuff. So have you looked at, I know this is pretty, it sounds like pretty airtight, but what's your take on that?
Well, the cost argument usually is a red herring. You're absolutely right. It would only come into play when police officers are doing their normal duties anyway. In other words, they've already pulled someone over for speeding, and now all they're doing is making a phone call to ICE's 24/7 hotline to find out if the guy's an illegal alien or not, because they've developed reasonable suspicion that he is. That's not an increase in cost in any meaningful sense. If they transfer the person to the custody of the Border Patrol or to ICE, that is a minimal expense. The police officers are constantly transporting detainees one way or the other, whether they've been arrested for a federal crime or a state crime. So the argument that this will cost too much money is really doesn't prove to be true when you look at it.
Well, I also look at the deterrent factor of this, that you would have hopefully less stuff to do as you move through here, because most people wouldn't want to mess with going into Arizona.
Well, that's kind of what
exactly.
our pilot was known.
And that's another point. The average illegal alien-headed household costs taxpayers $19,600 a year net. In other words, they consume government services and government expenses $19,600 more than they pay in taxes. And so to the extent that Arizona can discourage illegal aliens from staying in Arizona or coming to Arizona, or can encourage them to leave, that's a savings to taxpayers. Now, the savings might not be realized by the law enforcement agency. The savings might be realized by K-12 expenses, but the bottom line is the taxpayer is much better off. And we've already seen this. Your laws have already had an impressive effect in encouraging illegal aliens to leave, and K-12 savings have been more than $200 million since the beginning of 2008, where by enacting laws that encourage people to comply with the law in immigration, Arizona has encouraged many illegal alien households to leave, and that has been a savings in your education system of more than $200 million in the last 3 years.
Well, what our big school district here does, Tucson Unified School District, which is pretty much a mess, they lost through eVerify. They had so many illegal children of illegals leave the state and leave the district.
Schools,
and the way their funding works is they count how many kids after the first 100 days, and then they get so many dollars per kid. So, of course, they said, it's horrible because they started losing all this funding for kids. I mean, that's the way it works. So
that's the way bureaucrats work. I mean, in their eyes, the government bureaucracy is losing money from the state. But what they forget is that Arizona taxpayers are saving money because they're sending less money to the school districts, taking less money out of the taxpayer's pocket at the state level to finance the school district. So, yeah, whenever a school district squeals that it has fewer students, and that's a bad thing, you have to remember the taxpayer pays money per student.
Mm-hmm.
The other question I had before we get the call, 790-2040, is the number. Joe and I have talked about the PR that should accompany like this kind of law, and we've been talking about how we feel like the Republicans, who are the ones whose names are the ones that got this thing passed, it seems like the PR, I know a lot of states agree with what we're doing, but it just seems like the PR on this hasn't been as good as it should have been. What's your take on that?
I think that's looking back over the past month, what happened was the open borders crowd, for lack of a better term, immediately ran to the microphones as soon as Governor Brewer signed the law in, and started twisting the facts and started misconstruing the law. And so they did seize the initiative. The opponents did, and to be fair to the Arizona legislators and the governor's office, I think the reaction of the open borders crowd was much greater than people could have anticipated. Right. I think it would have been difficult to imagine that this would cause such a nationwide fuss.
We saw it during eVerify, but it was just kind of a blip for a month or so, and then all of a sudden
Exactly. And the national press didn't really pick up eVerify in the same way.
Right.
And so I think it's fair to, I don't think one could have reasonably expected all this national attention. But what happened was, of course, you had the president himself joining the others in the open borders crowd and himself mischaracterizing the law. And when that happened, then it just really went viral, and so they did not have the initiative, but maybe next time around they'll have a well.
The dynamics on this seem different than eVerify, because I remember when it was floating through the House and the Senate, eVerify, there was all the open border crowds were freaking out, right? This kind of hit me. Now here we are. We're two guys who run a radio show in Tucson, Arizona. Didn't seem like it just kind of popped up.
That's there was very little dialogue. However, it was snuck. I mean, I think Pierce knew that. He knew that he had to push it through, and it wouldn't. If it got debate before it got to vote, it would be a tough
I was back east in May for vacation, and I came back, and I'm emailing my friend who I got together with back there, and he said, "How come you didn't mention any of this when you were here?" I mean, I didn't know this was going to pop up.
Right?
Where'd it come from?
That's a strategy.
Yeah.
I think I can partially answer that, and that is the vagaries of a state legislative schedule. This happens in all the states. In almost all the states, because state legislatures have this abrupt ending date in either April or May, depending on the state you're talking about, there'll be a bill languishing in a committee, and then all of a sudden they'll realize, hey, we've got a week left before the legislature shuts down. We've got to get this thing moving. And so suddenly it'll go from stationary to fifth gear in one shot. And that's kind of what happened with this bill. I mean, I think Russell Pierce and others knew that they were intending on getting this thing done, but then the legislative calendar was coming to an end, and so it rapidly ramped up.
I wonder if the education PR could have been better if there was that pre-stuff before it got passed and signed.
It would have been so hot to get the vote through. It would have been tough. I mean, Brewer had to wrestle with it already.
All these hot votes this legislature's been voting on. So
we're going to take some calls. We're on the line with Kris Kobach, and Kris was
Kobach
was part of the architects of the SB 1070, and before that the eVerify law. And Kris, your background is you went through Harvard, you went on to Oxford and got your master's and PhD and law degree at Yale. So quite a background. And if you look at both eVerify and the SB 1070, the challenges of eVerify back in the Ninth District Court, which is fairly liberal, and then Holder came out early talking about challenging this, and then have kind of backed away from a federal point of view. So this looks pretty iron tight from what we're seeing.